Discarded from a slave ship, she was left to die until a human changed her fate. She had no name among them, only a barcode burned onto the side of her neck and the designation unit for F. To the Slaver cartel that operated the Drexen transport freighter, she was a genetic mix, too rare to breed and too volatile to sell. Her lineage HFY was deemed unpredictable, and her mind had fought back too often against the neural shackles they used to keep the others compliant. She had survived 4 auctions, 2 escape attempts, and 1 riot. And now she was simply inconvenient. That was enough to sign her death sentence. The ship didn't stop to execute her. It didn't even slow. High above the orbit of a mining world forgotten by the galactic star charts, a side hatch hissed open with a hydraulic groan. The guards laughed as they kicked her limp, restrained body toward the edge, her broken leg dragging uselessly. The cold punched her lungs before the fall did. One push, and the stars opened up around her like a cruel audience. Nara didn't scream as she fell. There was no point. Her body spiraled through the upper atmosphere, armor plates from her restraints burning away in the heat. She'd once learned that entering atmosphere from orbit could boil blood, rupture organs, and disintegrate bones, but fate played a strange hand. Instead of splitting apart in the sky, she cut through a band of storm winds like a meteor, trailing blue flames and sparks that twisted around her broken form like wings on fire. She hit the surface hard, but not the ground. A man caught her flesh and bone against falling fury. The catch Jiren Holt didn't expect the sky to open that day. He was just trying to get through another 12-hour shift as foreman of Sector 7 Grams. Deep within the cavernous mining fields of the desert moon Peller 6, his breath still steamed from the heat exhaust of the rig. He just shut down a rogue crawler that nearly fried to junior engineers. He wiped the grease from his fingers, rolled his shoulders, and looked up instinctively when the warning sirens glitched and silenced without explanation. Then he saw her, a comet. No, a figure wrapped in light and smoke, tumbling toward him, faster than his thoughts could keep up. The others ran. He didn't. His feet moved without command, bolting across scorched earth and fractured steel grates toward the crash vector. He didn't know what was falling or who it would be, but something inside him, old and primal and deeply human, told him it wasn't a thing. It was someone who didn't deserve to fall alone. He reached the edge of the pit just as the body hit. Momentum flung her toward the scaffolding. Without hesitation, Jiren leapt forward and braced. The impact drove them both into the dust. The wind knocked out of him as the alien woman's weight collapsed against his chest. She wasn't heavy, just broken. So broken. Her skin shimmered faintly with bioluminescence, bruised and dirtied beneath metal burns and whip scars. Vari heritage, he thought. He'd seen a few in the old resistance wars, but there was something else in her features, something sharp and celestial that didn't belong to any standard genome. Her eyes flickered open for one breath, then they rolled back and closed again. Jiren cradled her gently and shouted for medical, but no one came. He looked around. The other workers were frozen in disbelief, afraid, suspicious, or worse, indifferent. He didn't care. He carried her across the mining fields himself. Back in his quarters, he laid her down beside his workbench, wrapped her in the one good blanket he had, and started sterilizing his old med kit with trembling hands. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know why she had fallen from the sky like a silent judgment. But Jiren Holt was a builder, a fixer, a salvager of things thrown away. And as he looked at the broken woman resting under flickering power lights, her breath shallow but present, he knew one thing with unshakable certainty. He wasn't going to let her be forgotten. The healing days that followed moved in silence, broken only by the low hum of generators and the occasional spark of Jiren's tools in the adjoining room. Nara's body healed slowly, not from any advanced treatment, but from human stubbornness, the kind that refused to let someone die under his roof. He replaced her cracked rib with a splint fashioned from mining rig insulation, cleaned the filth from her burns with the last of his sterilizing serum, and spoon mouthfuls of nutrient broth into her gritted teeth. Even when she spat it back at him, she didn't speak. Her eyes opened in flickers and shut again in pain, mistrust, and fatigue. But she wasn't shackled. Not to the wall, not to a collar, not even to a bed. And that terrified her more than the pain. She had been conditioned to expect pain from freedom. Any moment now she expected the false kindness to give way to correction, the generosity to reveal itself as a trap, the soft words to snap into commands. But Jiren never asked questions, never demanded answers. Not even when she woke screaming, clawing at the cot as images of cold void and chains overwhelmed her. He would only sit nearby, fixing one of his old rig helmets or fusing a control board together with his calloused hands, as if to remind her that survival required patience and company. "You're not a guest," he said once, as she tried to drag herself toward the door, body still too weak to stand fully. "You live here now. You breathe here now. That's enough." She wanted to scream at him, wanted to curse the quiet sympathy in his voice, to burn his kindness to the ground so it would match the ash her life had become. But when she looked into his face, she saw no judgment, no pity, only a quiet loneliness, the kind buried deep in those who worked too long beneath the stars and asked for nothing in return. He had given her a name the first time he needed to call her something besides hey. "Nara," he whispered, when she was half awake. "It sounds like sky water on my mother's planet." Soft, but always moving. She hadn't told him to stop. That surprised her more than anything. In time, she found her legs again, though her left one dragged and ached from where the bone had splintered during the fall. She limped through his space like a ghost, watching how he lived. Messy but honest, rugged but with strange tenderness hidden between the scrap metal and ration wrappers. His room was small but full of stories, a carved animal figure from Earth's forests, a faded photo of a family she couldn't name, tools aligned with obsessive care, and shelves stacked with ancient books about machines that no longer existed. She spoke for the first time when she touched one of the books. "You read these?" Jiren looked up, surprised. "I live these." Her voice came out hoarse, like old gravel dragged across her throat. "Why help me?" He thought for a long time before answering. Because someone should have helped sooner. That night, she stood by the window, watching the stars without fear for the first time in her life. She didn't know if this place was sanctuary, or simply a pause in the punishment of existence. But one truth nested inside her, strange and unfamiliar. He did not see her as broken. And for the first time, she wondered if maybe she wasn't. The return came 3 weeks later in a ship that cut through the night like a wound. The same cartel crest marked their hull, a jagged silver claw scarring the face of every world they stripped of people. It hovered low above the mining outpost, its engines whispering menace, its spotlights flooding the ground like the stare of a hungry predator. Jiren was in the central pit, recalibrating the excavator drills, when the alarm triggered. An alert, meant for atmospheric breach, not visitors. The colony's defense grid, half rusted and only partially operational, flickered uselessly. There was no welcoming party. The cartel didn't land to talk. They came to reclaim. One of the workers, a nervous young technician named Kelwin, broadcasted the emergency channel across the mine as soon as the ship's secondary hatch opened. And 2 enforcers in full slaver armor dropped onto the deck. The foreman's voice cut through the confusion like a blade. "Everyone clear the grid." "I said clear it now." Jiren sprinted back toward his quarters, heart thundering, instinct burning through his veins. He didn't know how they had tracked her. Maybe a trace signal from the Neural brand. Maybe a bribe from one of the council members who feared her presence. It didn't matter. They were here, and she was in danger. Nara had already heard the ship. She stood in the corner of Jiren's room with a plasma cutter in hand, gripping it like a blade, trembling not with fear but with memory. She had been through too much to go quietly. Too many nights branded surplus, too many kicks, too many collars. But now she had something to lose. Jiren burst through the door, eyes locking on hers. "They're here. You have to hide." "No," she said. "I fight." His breath caught. "Then we fight." The first enforcer crashed into the corridor 5 minutes later, scanner eyes glowing crimson through reinforced visors. He raised his arm to fire, but Jiren tackled him from the side, torque wrenching the servo joint at the shoulder until it snapped. Like dry wood, Nara lunged with the plasma cutter and drove the blade deep into the enforcer's neck seam, the light flaring violently before he collapsed. The second stepped in but hesitated just long enough to recognize her face. His voice rasped through the helmet. "You were thrown. You were nothing." Nara's hand didn't tremble as she reached for the mining torch. Her voice was steel. "Then let's see what nothing can do." The flame engulfed his helmet in seconds, and he stumbled backward into the reactor conduit, screaming. The sound echoed through the colony. Not fear, not agony. It was the sound of a myth being born. By the time the cartel ship lifted off and fled into the upper atmosphere, failing to retrieve its lost asset, the entire mine was watching, silent and struck. Nara stood in the dust beside Jiren, breathing hard, skin streaked with soot and fury. He looked at her not as a saved soul, but as an equal. "You're not surplus," he whispered. "You're the storm." And she believed him. The council news of the attack didn't take long to spread through the colony. Rumors leapt like fire through dry wire. Everyone had heard it. The alien woman who fell from the sky had not just survived the slavers. They said she fought them, killed one, burned another alive. The story twisted and stretched in whispers, but one detail remained constant: she didn't run. Jiren sat in the mining hall the next day, wiping engine grease off his arms while the colony council filed in like slow-moving vultures. The hall, once used to distribute rations and vote on power outages, had become a courtroom for their discomfort. The council's leader, Drevian Merrick, wore a tunic that hadn't seen dust in months, his fingers perfectly clean. He hadn't worked a rig in years. He didn't look at Jiren when he spoke. "You harbored a fugitive without consulting us." Jiren leaned back in the broken bench and stared at the cracked ceiling. "I harbored someone you would have let die." She attracted violence. Drevian snapped. "Your choice endangered the entire outpost. Had the cartel brought more forces, we'd be ash and smoke. They didn't." Jiren's voice dropped, calm and heavy, because she ended it before it got worse. Another council member, an older woman named Wella, leaned forward. Her voice was softer, but more dangerous. "We have a fragile peace with the slaver syndicates, Jiren. You know this. We are tolerated as long as we stay out of sight and give them no reason to descend." Jiren folded his arms. "So let me get this straight. If someone breaks into my home to steal a life you were too afraid to protect, I should let them." No one answered. The silence in the room wasn't peace. It was politics. Drevian finally stood. "If she stays, we all pay the price. She's to be exiled." By dusk, no arguments. Jiren stood with him, towering by a good foot and covered in decades of sun and metal and righteous exhaustion. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "If she leaves, I leave." That stopped everything. The workers gathered behind the council began murmuring. Jiren Holt wasn't just a foreman. He was the spine of the colony's rigs, the one who kept the power cells humming and the dig teams alive in the heat. He'd revived the fractured power cores twice. He'd stopped 3 full-scale collapses in mining shafts that the engineers had abandoned, and more than once he'd pulled men out of cave-ins with his bare hands. He was irreplaceable, and everyone knew it. "She stays?" Jiren repeated. "Or your drills don't." Drevian opened his mouth, then closed it, well aside and leaned back. "So be it." Jiren didn't look victorious as he left. He looked tired of having to fight for basic dignity. When he returned home, Nara sat on the cot, arms folded, eyes low. "You should have let them send me away," she muttered. "This isn't your war." Jiren knelt in front of her. "Then it's ours now." She couldn't answer. There were no words big enough to carry the weight in her chest. Later that night, the outpost's lights flickered from a low-energy pulse. Jiren climbed onto the roof to realign the solar catchers, and Nara followed him not to help, just to watch. The sky above Pelora 6 was a strange thing, always rust-colored, thick with magnetic haze. But that night it cleared just enough to let a few stars shine through, bright and thin. "Do you miss your sky?" he asked, not looking down. She thought for a moment. "I miss what I thought it would mean." He glanced at her face lit by the glow of the adjuster tool. "Which was that somewhere. I wouldn't be thrown away." The wind picked up and blew gently across the roof, rustling the loose fabric of their sleeves. Jiren reached over and tapped her hand once with a fingertip almost like a signal, not a gesture. "You weren't." Not this time. The growth in the days that followed, the air in the colony shifted. The fear didn't vanish, but it warped into something else. Respect, curiosity, wariness. The workers who once averted their eyes from her now lingered longer, nodding subtly, some even dropping her brief greetings. Children pointed at her from behind scrapyard crates and whispered stories. Some called her a warrior from the edge stars. Others said she fell to punish the slavers, an avenging angel with burned skin and glowing eyes. Nara didn't respond to any of it. She spent most of her hours in the hangars with Jiren, helping him repair scavenged equipment from failed mining bots and scav drones. He gave her gloves that didn't fit at first, and she burned herself 4 times before learning the pulse arc settings. He didn't laugh when she cursed. He just handed her water and showed her again quietly. There was no rank between them, only rhythm. They didn't speak often during work, but silence had never been her enemy. Silence was peace. Silence was control. In the presence of someone who did not judge her stillness, she became more than a broken animal. She became precise. One evening, while reconfiguring a power coupler, she hesitated over the fuse cluster. Jiren watched her. "Trust yourself," he said. "I don't." He didn't argue. Instead, he put her hand on the tool, steadying it. "Then borrow mine." She stared at his fingers curled over hers, not romantic, not gentle, just real. By the end of that night, the coupler hummed with perfect calibration. Jiren noticed something else in her too. Her scars didn't just heal, they hardened. They formed calluses, not only on her hands but in her eyes. She no longer flinched at sudden movements or bristled at loud footsteps. And when he handed her the heavy alloy knife every miner carried, she gripped it with a steadiness that chilled even him. She was becoming something else. One day they worked late into dusk, rerouting one of the lower pit's energy conduits. As they rested beneath the scaffolding frame, drinking from the same canteen, Jiren asked quietly, "Do you ever think about leaving?" Nara looked up at the jagged horizon. "No, I'm not." She paused, then simply, "Because you didn't throw me away." He nodded. Later, in the quiet of the room they now both lived in, though neither called it home, Jiren handed her something wrapped in warm fabric. Inside, folded neatly, was a spare engineer's coat, repatched with alloy thread. On the shoulder, his crew's crest had been stitched by hand. "Don't want you working in torn robes," he said casually. Nara traced the fabric. "Is this a uniform?" "It's armor," he said, "of a different kind." She stood in the dim light of the utility lamp and put it on. It didn't fit perfectly, but it didn't have to, because for the first time in her life, Nara Vex was not a slave, not an object, not a number. She was part of something made from fire, sweat, and choice. And as the low buzz of the colony pulsed around her like a living thing, she realized the truth. This wasn't just survival. This was becoming. The spark it began not with fireworks, but with a wire thin, exposed, and pulsing low voltage from a faulty panel near the substation. Nara had been adjusting the sensor feed when her elbow nudged a relay and the wire arced, sending a sharp flicker through the nearby grid. She hissed instinctively, recoiling but didn't fall. Before she could assess the damage, Jiren was there, hands outstretched, eyes wide with concern. He grabbed her wrist gently, inspecting the faint burn on her forearm like it was something sacred. "You need gloves," he said, voice lower than usual. "I had them," she replied, holding up her charred pair. "They didn't like me today." He chuckled, soft, genuine, and short, as if it surprised even him. They were alone again. That had become more frequent since the incident with the cartel. The colony gave them space now, or perhaps it was fear disguised as respect. Either way, Nara found she didn't mind the quiet when he was near. The silence between them had grown roots, deep and wide, wrapping around the remnants of whatever pain they didn't speak of. He handed her a new pair of gloves from his belt pouch, standard issue Earth Flex, worn but reliable. She put them on, and for a moment, the gesture felt oddly intimate. Not romantic, not yet. But the air shifted. That night, the mining lights cast long shadows across the compound as the drills rested and the heat exchangers fell into their usual low hum. Nara returned to their shared room, now unmistakably theirs, though no one had said it aloud. Jiren was already inside, working on a disassembled sensor array, with a solder tool in his teeth. "You're bleeding," she said, pointing to his thumb. He glanced down. Not the first time, probably not the last. She moved toward him without thinking and took his hand. She didn't ask permission, just cleaned the cut with a cloth and wrapped it tightly. When she looked up, he wasn't watching the wound. He was watching her, and something passed between them, then quiet as the desert wind, but fierce beneath the surface. "Why are you like this?" she asked. "Like what kind?" "Gentle with me." He didn't answer right away. He simply breathed, and then finally said, "Because the world already tried to break you. I don't need to join in." She blinked once, then again. "You make it hard to stay angry." He grinned. "Good. Anger looks heavy on you. I prefer the way you fight machines." She didn't smile, not with her lips, but something in her eyes softened. In the days that followed, their patterns grew more synchronized. He'd reach for a tool, and she'd already be handing it. She'd start a sentence, and he'd finish the calibration. She hadn't described. She began to find reasons to walk his routes, matching his pace during inspections, and laughing just once when his drone unit ran into a wall because he was too distracted watching her work. He brought her a piece of tech one evening, a cracked visor from a long-dead suit. Think you could repair it? She took it without a word and disappeared into the corner with a solder pen. 30 minutes later, she handed it back, restored, functional, clean. Jiren stared at it, stunned. That would have taken me hours. I'm learning, she said simply. You taught me. He looked at her, truly looked, as if for the first time, and then, quietly, I like who you're becoming. She met his gaze. So do I. They didn't touch. Not yet. But the distance between them felt thinner every day, like a thread stretched across a gulf that had once seemed uncrossable, now drawn taut and shimmering in the light. The storm attack came at dusk. Not a whisper, not a warning, but an eruption. A sky flare burst open above the western ridge, followed by the unmistakable scream of orbital engines. This time it wasn't just a scout vessel. It was a war cruiser, black, hulled, fang-shaped, and twice the size of anything the cartel had dared send before. The Slavers hadn't forgotten the shame of losing a surplus asset, and now they were making sure everyone paid for it. The outpost. Alarms shrieked as the defensive grid tried to spool up, but half the turrets were still in dry dock or running on backup batteries. Panic flooded the lower levels. Civilians scrambled for underground shelters, engineers abandoned their posts, and the colony's weak militia tried to arm themselves with repurposed mining lasers. Jiren grabbed his rig belt, the utility blade, and his old Earthbreaker rifle, a relic he hadn't touched in years. But before he could run out the door, Nara stopped him. They're here for me, she said, stepping forward. I'll go to the tower. Are you insane? If I don't, this place burns. She didn't wait for permission. She grabbed her makeshift armor welded together from loader plating and reactor casing and fastened it across her shoulders. The coat he gave her remained underneath, like a heartbeat against her skin. She ran across the colony grounds, boots slamming against steel walkways, eyes fixed on the central tower. The Slavers were already descending in drop ships, 3 of them unleashing squads in body armor and plasma cutters. They weren't just here to kill. They were here to humiliate. She reached the tower's lift before they saw her, scaled the emergency rungs as the heat of their thrusters melted the metal around her. At the top, she opened the conduit vault and accessed the power routing grid. She remembered Jiren's instructions from days ago, how to override fail-safes, how to reroute surge loops. He had taught her more than survival. He had taught her systems. The Slavers began their sweep below, firebombing the fuel stacks and pinning down the few defenders left. But then the tower lit up, not as a beacon, as a warning. A low rumble echoed through the ground. Then a high-frequency whine screamed through the clouds. Nara slammed the final switch and jammed the overload regulator. Plasma arcs fired from the auxiliary grid like lightning. The energy pulse surged upward and detonated in the cruiser's underbelly. The ship cracked. The roar of its collapse thundered across the valley as flaming debris rained from the sky, setting the horizon alight in colors none of them had ever seen. Jiren reached the tower minutes later, lungs burning, heart louder than the alarm still. Wailing, he found her slumped at the base of the core panel, coughing up black soot, her skin blistered, her eyes wild. Did it work? She rasped. He dropped to his knees beside her and cradled her head. You brought down a cruiser with a mining relay. She laughed hard and beautiful. You're going to need a new tower. He held her closer, not out of fear she would die, but out of awe that she hadn't. Not even the sky could kill her. And now the firestorm that once burned her was behind her. The colony was still standing because she was. The recognition flames continued to dance across the hills of Pelora 6 long after the last piece of the cruiser fell. Twisted metal rained like cursed snow, igniting barren sands and forgotten dunes. But the colony stood untouched, scarred, scorched, shaken, but standing. And as the dust began to settle, it was not the sight of ruined enemy ships that pulled people from their hiding places. It was her. Nara emerged from the shadow of the tower, limping, soot-covered, smoke curling from her shoulder plates like something conjured from legend. The colony's youngest were the first to run toward her, small hands reaching for her fingertips, eyes wide as if gazing upon a miracle. She had no words for them, just a nod and a single slow breath that confirmed she was still alive. Behind her, Jiren walked with his arm wrapped protectively around her waist, supporting her without owning her, guiding her without leading. No one said anything at first, and then, one by one, workers laid down their tools. Engineers emerged from rubble, guards lowered their weapons, and even the silent, bitter-eyed council stepped into the light with humbled expressions. Not because she had survived, not because the enemy had lost, but because something irreversible had happened. The colony no longer belonged to the fear that ruled it. It belonged to the courage that defied it. They gathered in the central chamber of the mining hub that evening, lit only by reclaimed battery torches and the soft flicker of arc lamps. Nara stood near the back, half wrapped in Jiren's jacket. Her injuries bandaged but still raw. She didn't want to speak. But when Drevian Merrick, the same councilman who once called for her exile, stepped forward and lowered his head before her, the silence became a declaration. "You saved us," he said, voice brittle with something that may have been shame. "We were wrong." She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply replied, "I was never here to take anything from you." Jiren watched her as if seeing her for the first time. And maybe he was not the woman who had fallen from the stars, but the one who now stood among the living, not as a guest, or a ghost or a fugitive, but as one of them. Later, as the colony rebuilt and the survivors shared food cooked over arc fires, Jiren and Nara sat beside each other near the tower's shadow. He looked at the flames, then at her. "You never told me why you didn't let go." She tilted her head. "When I fell?" He nodded. She hesitated before answering. "Because I wanted to believe someone would catch me." Jiren reached for her hand this time, not as protector, not as savior, but as equal. And when she didn't pull away, he gripped it tightly, like a man who finally knew what home meant. The stars above began to return, one by one, as if the sky itself was no longer afraid. The memorialty carving was done by a boy no older than 12, using a scorched piece of alloy pipe and a torch he borrowed from his father. It took him 3 days to finish the letters, working quietly while the grown-ups repaired mining arms and reinforced shelters. He didn't tell anyone what he was doing. He just climbed the tower, found the old broken steel plate where the warning sign used to be, and began to scratch. When the work was done, the entire colony gathered to see it. 3 words hammered into steel, with blackened edges and trembling hands: Narvex, defender of the unclaimed. The council didn't object. In fact, Wella wept when she saw it, not from grief, but because she'd seen a dozen heroes rise and vanish, without memory. This one, they would not forget. Nara stood at the base of the tower with her hands folded, saying nothing. She didn't need to. The scars on her arms, the burn lines on her armor, the cold dust in her breath all told the story, better than words ever could. Jiren was beside her, his hand resting against the curve of her back. He had offered her more than shelter, more than survival. He had offered her space to heal, to breathe, to become, and she had filled it not with obedience, not with gratitude, but with something neither of them had dared dream about: belonging. In the weeks that followed, no one called her alien anymore. No one whispered surplus. Instead, she was the one asked to speak during meetings, to train the new guard in tower defense, to show the engineers how to reroute overloads. The children drew pictures of her with plasma wings and steel fists. The workers sang fragments of old Earth songs, rewritten with her name. And Jiren, he no longer slept alone. They shared a cot. They shared silence. They shared sunrises through the broken halls of slaver ships and late-night repairs under copper moons. They didn't need titles. They didn't even need words. One night, when she looked at him across the room, grease smeared across her cheek, he asked quietly, "Do you still feel like you fell?" She shook her head. "No, I feel like I landed." He smiled. "Good. Then I was the ground." She crossed the space between them without hesitation and kissed him. Not with desperation, but with something stronger, something earned, something that neither sky nor fire could burn away.